Thank you. Hopefully, if you can't hear me in the back okay, just let me know and I can try to speak louder. It's usually never been an issue for me. But I'd like to thank you for taking your time out to come out tonight. I've spoken a number of times about our deployment to Hurricane Sandy. And when Jeff asked me if I would come and present tonight, part of what he had asked is if I could explain the process of the deployment, what it is that we do behind the scenes to get ready for our deployment, and then what goes through, during the deployment and whatnot. I have some pictures in here, and so if I kind of go off base a little bit, it's because a picture might remind me of stuff. I'm not a real scripted person, and I will walk around the room a little bit. If anytime you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me and ask. If not, I'm sure we'll have time at the end. All right. The deployment process, and I'll go through this quickly. This is probably the most boring part for you, but to let you know what Tri-Hospital EMS has to do, we're notified by another ambulance agency called AMR, and basically they'll start putting out emails saying, FEMA's contacted us and put us on standby. You folks need to start getting ready and start preparing. So as soon as we start getting that, technically as soon as we start getting weather alerts, just from your local news, then we start to brainstorm. We start looking at credentialing and everything and putting our team together. Notification of tri-hospital personnel. We have a list of employees that qualify to go, and then we start typically by a seniority type process, and then we'll kind of go from there. We always send a member of management, whether it's a shift supervisor or myself, to go. It's a long way to go to just send your personnel to kind of be freestanding. Securing disaster relief resources, the vehicle, the equipment, the personnel. Because we never know where we're going to be or how long we're going to be there, it's important that we get our equipment ready. And by equipment, our vehicles, we send them into the maintenance shop. We make sure that we got good tires on, that the oil's changed, that anything that possibly could go wrong is checked, and that it's in good working condition, because we're not going to be of any asset if we break down on the way there. Awaiting official deployment notification. We can't go anywhere until FEMA gives AMR the green light, and then they go ahead and deploy from that process. Communications with AMR during the response. Every time, as soon as we leave, we have to call NATCOM is what they call it. When we say we're leaving Port Huron, they'll say, okay, we want you to call us in 3 hours. We call them in 3 hours and say, okay, we are now in Ohio. And 3 hours later, you repeat the process. That is the only tracking system of how they know where we're at and how far we are from our destination. There have been instances where people have been rerouted when they've called. We've never experienced that in any of the deployments that we've had. And then arrival in the check-in process sometimes can be very daunting, because you have 100 ambulances show up at once, you have 200 people. They literally have to go through each individual, all of your credentialing, make sure that all your paperwork is correct. And so that process, in my opinion, is by far the longest process that there is. And it's just, it's amazing to me the amount of people that show up and don't have the proper credentialing with them. They already have an electronic one, but we also bring a hard copy one too. So if there's any question, we carry it with us wherever we go, and we could provide that information anytime it's needed. So part of what we look for when we send folks out is to be self-motivated, a leader, and that doesn't have to be a leader in a situation of a member of management, just a typical, somebody that can go in and take charge. Function with minimal guidance. I say that because you are, at least from our service, there are times that they're out all by themselves, and they have to be a free thinker. They have to be able to make a quick decision and hopefully make the right decision. But they also have to be able to, they're always representing our organization. And so they're a walking billboard, whether they're in the state of New York, the state of Mississippi, or if they're here in Port Huron. The requirements for anybody to even just go on the eligibility list to go to be deployed, obviously a current driver's license, whatever their EMS certification be, whether it's basic or medic. They have to have their EVOC, their hazmat awareness. We have to have record of hepatitis B. And then they have to have the following NIMS: 100, 200, 700, 800. They also would prefer that you have 300 and 400, but it is not a requirement. It is, however, a requirement to be a strike team leader or a task force leader. And then a passport or enhanced driver's license. We ran into this because typically a hurricane, you go south. You don't go east or north in any way, shape, or form. And so we were caught off off guard on this a little bit. Some of us had it and some of us did not. And so when we were first deployed, we went to New Jersey. We really wanted to go through Canada, We're like, you know what, we need to make sure that we get there in the time frame. There's a certain time frame that you have to respond, and we didn't want to be held up, so we took the long way. But we did take Canada back, and they thankfully let us enter back in. I think it was once we rolled down the pickup truck and they seen our worried faces, they were like, just go. But all personnel, when they go, they need to be self-sufficient for 72 hours. And so the person, anybody that goes, they have a, like a 72-hour be-ready list. This is stuff that they need to bring. Uniforms and, essentials and shampoo and soap and baby wipes and the list that we give them that they need. And then from an organizational standpoint, we provide them with their medical supplies, food, water. All of our trucks that went, we sent 3 trucks this last time, could be self-sufficient for probably more than 72 hours if need be. And it is important because literally when you first get there, you're freestanding. You don't have resources. We went to a Army base. We went to Fort Trott, or Fort Dix, I always say Fort Trott. We went to Fort Dix in New Jersey. They weren't, at one point we had 250 ambulances there. They ran down. They had to shut the kitchen down. They couldn't accommodate that. Housing-wise, they could give us, a place to sleep and a shower, but they couldn't feed. And there were a tremendous amount of people that came out and didn't have any supplies. Personnel must be ready to leave within 2 to 3 hours of active deployment. We constantly are in communication with the employee and say, okay, we're on standby, they've activated these folks now, at any time when I call you, you need to be here within 2 or 3 hours and we're leaving. So if you're willing to be on this list for however long, when you get the phone call, you need to be here. If you can't meet those requirements, tell me now because we're moving on. There's time restraints that you have to meet, and sitting there waiting for employees to show up. And in the meantime, I'll call them in between and say, you have your stuff packed, you pack this, you pack this, you pack this, and feel like I'm mothering a little bit, but it is important to make sure you have everything. Anticipated work, 911 calls. Everybody thinks that when you go to any type of relief that's what you're there to do. You're there to do all the 911 calls. I would say that the majority of any time that we've went, that's probably the least amount of what we have done. Sometimes we go and back up an area just so they could get some rest. But the majority of what we did was emergency transports. We'll talk about some ventilated patients that we transported in the nursing facilities and simply just evacuating, removing patients from an unsafe environment and taking them to a specific area. One area that we went to, they wanted us to run their 911 calls. This was when we were in Mississippi. They said, we'd like you to run our 911 calls, and then the local area ambulance will just do the hospital transfer. And I said, I had a hard enough time finding your station here. And there's no road signs, we didn't have a map. I said, I would think it's just easier for us to take your hospital transfers, and you guys stay with your local. I don't have any way to communicate with your hospitals. And so they're open to that. I just think that they think that when you're coming in, that you want to do what they call the exciting stuff, the emergencies. And that's actually not at all, in my opinion, what we were there for. The tracking, when we checked in, everybody was given that E-track. And you had one on the front of your truck and you had one on the back of your truck. This allowed you access wherever you went. If an ambulance showed up and they did not have this, they weren't allowed into the staging area. This is how you were identified. And when you called in, we had a number in the front to check in. We said this is truck 23, 990, or whatever the number was, and this is where we're at. And then they would go ahead and record that to keep track. Then once you're done with the actual mission, you go through a demobilization process. Ideally, when we send staff out, we like to keep the crews there for at least 2 weeks before we do any exchange. There have been times where we've tried to do a little bit earlier, but circumstances didn't allow it. So you should know that when you go, you're going for 2 weeks. You need to be prepared for that. And then assuring proper check-in and check-out during mobilization. All those papers that you learn about in NIMS, all the sheets and stuff, they live and breathe it. And you have to fill out that paperwork. If your paperwork is not correct, then they either make you redo it or your reimbursement isn't the same or whatever the case may be. So all of that is critical that you learn. And then the after-action plan deployment assessment. So that was just a quick synopsis about what we go through to get there. And so now I'm just going to kind of concentrate about Sandy when we got there and what it was like for us. This, I am told, is an actual picture. I'm not 100% sure. I certainly didn't see anything like that. But some of the facts that are interesting when you're thinking about natural disasters and how how it could affect us here in the city of Port Huron. You know, we all think, yeah, we've got some, you know, chemical trucks that come back and forth, but natural disasters in itself, between 2000 and 2012, natural disasters affected 2.9 million. 1.1 million people died between 2000 and 2012 simply because of natural disasters. Nearly 50% of fatalities caused by natural disasters in 2002 were due to hydraulic events, hurricane and flooding, things that are completely out of our control, something that we can't stop. The intensity of natural disasters has increased 15 times as compared to 1950. You know, we can train how to, you know, put a fire out, and we can train hazmat and those types of situations, but, you know, stop and think in your own community, what would you do if you had flooding? What would you do if there was a hurricane? The bottom line, the unpredictability of disasters will not change. Focusing on the need and for preparation and pre-planning. I don't know about you, I am not one, I don't like meetings. I become very antsy. After being deployed, this was my second deployment, and we go to these tabletops. I see the firsthand of the need to pre-plan and to talk about these things and to, you know, to beat the dead horse and go, really, you think that that can happen? It actually can, and heaven forbid it happens here. It could happen to our folks in Lambton, it could happen our folks in Macomb County, anywhere that we could possibly go. But the question is, if it happens here, what are you going to do, and how are you going to prepare for that? Continue assessment of pre-plans to ensure and rescue and agency safety. After every deployment, we come back and we change something, we learn something new. We'll talk about later, most of the deployments that we've had have been down south. It's hot. We went out east, it was cold. You know, our highest temp we had was 32 degrees. And then we had a nor'easter come in and got 6 inches of snow on that. O'Toole's law, Murphy's law states that if something can go wrong, it will. And then O'Toole says that Murphy was an optimist. So, one of the first things, it seemed like every deployment that we went on was at night. We happened to have the night shift for whatever reason. And so when we got out and about during the day, we were really surprised to see this is the local fire station that was devastated from the flooding. Some learning points that we're going to kind of talk about. I'd like to talk about communication, rescuer safety, patient information for those of you that have any type of dealings with interfacility hospitals, nursing homes, AFCs, whatever the case may be, and then some patient information and organizational concerns. Communications. This is kind of what it felt like, a bunch of gobbledygook. You would think in the day and age that we are right now, in every meeting that you've ever talked to, the number one thing that people struggle with is communications. It is no different in a hurricane. It is even worse. All we had was our cell phone. And you didn't really have the cellular use of the cell phone. The texting is what worked back and forth to be able to text. Apparently that doesn't take as much data, and so you were able to get that through. So you'd be sent out on a mission, told where to go, and I'll show you a picture of the instructions that we were given. And you relied on your phone to text to say, we can't find her, we confirm that address, and hope that whatever number they gave you is going to work, that they have a signal, and that somebody's going to respond. Task force, for those of you that aren't aware, when we get deployed and we arrive, we first put you up in strike teams. And the strike team for EMS is ambulance, five ambulances put together. And then from there, they decide whether or not they want to put you in a task force. And so if you go into a task force, you're then put in with 20 other ambulances. So a task force consists of 25 ambulances. And then there's one person that's in charge of each strike team. So the task force, and then 5 members total, strike team leaders, come and meet. And that's who kind of briefs, and we decide where we're going and how we're going to do it and how we're going to communicate. The ability to communicate within the task force. One of the things that we struggled with in my strike team is I had 3 of our ambulances. 2 of the ambulances we had absolutely no way of talking to. They only had VHF radio. They didn't have any 800 radio. You know, they had the cell phones, and it was like you can't constantly be back and forth and trying to find a common channel that we all had. They didn't seem to have. And so we said, okay, I'm responsible for these folks. I had never met them, but they're my responsibility. And so whenever we went in a convoy together, we put a tri-hospital rig, their rig, a tri-hospital rig, their rig, and a tri-hospital rig. That way, no matter what, if we got broken off, the back person knew where we were going, and we could communicate with the front just to try to keep track of them. So it did make it a little bit difficult, especially if, on the chances, we would go on a mission, but then we were all sent to different places to take the patient, and then we had to meet back up. And so the meeting back up process was, a little nervous. waiting for, you get one show up, two show up, three show up, and you're like, come on, one more. The ability to communicate with receiving facilities. Anytime we took a patient, like from a scene, we had no way of letting the hospital know. And for you hospital folks, or for those of you that are used to dealing with hospitals, they really weren't excited just to see us. Especially if we had a priority patient. You just literally had to show up at their door. Sometimes you would have assistance from the local folks, but 9 times out of 10, if you were running the 911 calls, it's because they needed your help. Resource communication, identifying a fuel resource. This was huge. Luckily, from our other deployments, we knew that as soon as we got under half a tank, we would pull over and fuel up, especially as we got closer to where we wanted to go, because if you don't have power, it's hard to get the fuel. But what happened out in New York is they ran out of gas, just regular gasoline. We were looking for diesel, but most of the gas stations closed because most people in New York don't drive a diesel vehicle. And so just trying to identify where we're going to go to get fuel. And even once we went over to Floyd Bennett and staged, it took another 2 days for them to get a fuel truck there. And so whenever we went, you saw something open, you had to try to see if you could get the fuel. And then you had other members that had no way of paying for the fuel. So the folks in our strike team had no way. They weren't set with anything, and they need fuel. So, and they didn't have their own food, and they didn't have their own water. But facility-oriented ability to communicate with facility status when needed and addressing necessary diversions. We did run into one instance where we showed up and they're like, whoa, we have absolutely no capability of taking any more patients. So we're like, all right, now where do we go? And I'll get into that a little bit further. I will say probably the most eventful thing for myself was our first mission that we went on. We were part of a task force, and they came up to one of the strike teams and they said, hey, we want you to go over to this Rockaway Manor and just go check it out. We're getting reports that the facility, which was a nursing facility, had not been evacuated. So they sent these 5 strike teams, this 5 member ambulances over to Rockaway. It was only probably about a 20-minute drive. Well, about 2 hours, 3 hours later, I'm like, has anybody heard from them? And they're like, no, I really don't think so. They said, well, let's send another strike team. I said, why don't we all just go? I mean, if they haven't returned, something's going on. And if it's nothing, then we'll take the 20 minutes and we'll come back. But the whole point of having a task force is to stay together. Well, as we approached the facility, the entire city block was on fire. And the New York Fire Department was there, and they had put most of it out. However, right there where you see it continuing to burn is the gas. They couldn't get any utilities in there to come shut the gas off. And so they literally had to their resources were there, stuck, just manning this. And they couldn't come help us, they had to stay here. And there was only 2 of them on the fire truck after they had put it out. So like I said, the gas companies weren't able to make it down there. This right here, I don't know how well, Nikki, can you dim the lights a little bit maybe? This is the corner, and down this way is where the nursing facility was. And maybe when Nikki dims the lights a little bit, if you'll be able to see, I don't know if you can tell, all of this is sand and muck. It's actually a street. There was probably, if I had to guess, probably 6-8 inches of sand and mud that we had to go through. But right here, I don't know if you can see it, there's a power line that's down and it's live, because again, they couldn't get any utilities out there. This power line here happened to be live, and they couldn't get any utilities out there to shut it off. And we have a person staged right here, which they had not had before. The problem is you couldn't pull down this street, you couldn't go down, head first. You had to back into it. And the reason is there was so much debris. There was a boat that was right down here that was washed up from the ocean, or off the ocean side, I should say. And then there was garbage and debris and cars that were parked in the street that had been moved. And so the fire department went through, they had a truck, their fire truck, and it literally just had a big plow on the front of it, but it was like almost like a combat plow, if you will. And they went through and busted through a 1 lane in and 1 lane out. And so obviously there was nowhere once we got down into it to turn around so you could just drive back out. So we had somebody here, and each truck would go, and you had to guide them through the wire, and then you had to back them down the whole way, just because there was no markers. There's cars everywhere, there's debris, and you kind of had to turn. And so as I'm backing, as we get down there, and we get out, everybody just kind of takes a minute, you're like, holy mother of pearl. And there were some other choice words in there, but, and then you just kind of get back to action. During the day, this happened to be that city block, and right there was that, was the opposite side of what we were on. Some of the other things that we want to talk about is rescuer safety. You know, I think from my standpoint, we kind of take for granted here in the city or anywhere in St. Clair County, we usually have the fire department that goes with us, and if there's anything structurally wrong with the building, they're always there to say, yes, you can go in, or no, you can't go in, or somebody is there. Well, we were here, you're all by yourself. You don't have any resources. The resources have been taken. And so, we'll talk about rescuer safety, the shelter. This was our shelter. We were talking with our Canadian friends today, and this is literally, that was our home, my home for the 14 days that we were out there. We slept in it, we ate in it, you know, you sat in it, you worked in it, and that's just, the shelter, and we'll get into that a little bit more, just wasn't there for us, and so this really became our home, along with, this is our whole task force. This was, again, to some of the shelter in here. We weren't able to go inside. There was an ice arena that was in here. This used to be an old Air Force base, but there used to be an ice arena in here, but they still had business. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been around 10 EMS folks, it can be a little sketchy sometimes, just they're, you know, when they're by themselves. Try having, we had 300 ambulances out of here. And so everybody wanted to go in to use the facilities, and you know, they had food, fresh food, and that kind of stuff. So at some point they said, you know what, we really can't have you guys coming in and out. We have kids in here coming in to skate and whatnot. And so this was part of our strike team that we had. For some reason, they had all of this parking spot, but they wanted to put us all in this little square. You know, we were all tight together. Well, if you can imagine being in the middle of winter, you can't shut your, well, it was 32 degrees, you can't shut your truck off. It's just too cold. And they put you all here. Notice, you know, we're here in the back, there's nobody behind us, but in front of us there was probably 6 or 7 rows of ambulances. Well, what happened is the people here in the middle started to get sick. You know, they're, oh, we have a headache, you know, we don't feel good, and we're like, hello, because they had us all, and at some point you sit there and you evaluate the thought process, and you're thinking, why, and so then we just decided, you know what, when we pull in, we're gonna be a car length apart, each of us, you know, and they're like, you guys need to move over. We're like, I think we're good right now. Some of the other, the shelter or the safety, you know, this was when we were going to do well-being checks on high rises. They sent, we would load up, each of us had probably about 5 or 6 National Guards. They'd load them up in the back of the truck, we'd take them in, we'd all go do well-being checks, and then kind of come back. But again, this is commonly how they had us staged. And then at one point somebody said, you know, is it really probably smart to be sitting there where that light pole's looks like it could go down at any time? Food is interesting, especially here. And I'm going to talk to this a little bit more in depth, but again, remember that it's cold. And they didn't have any facilities set up, so they would bring in food, and it was on a flatbed, literally like a, kind of like a tow truck, flatbed. And they brought the food out like this, in these little containers, and set it on top of the flatbed outside. And then they take these off, and if you were the first 3 or 4 people in line to get food, it was warm and it was good. After that, you really needed to watch because it got cold quick. And for some reason, people had a fascination with seagulls, so they throw the food up in the air, and so then all the birds would start. And so, you know, birds aren't really particular where they fly and what they do when they're flying. So you go to look at the food, and you're like, not so hungry anymore, because it had, you know, the bird feces in it. Safety again. One of the other things that was, when we were doing the Rockaway banner, there was a gentleman that refused to leave his home, and he was there by himself, and every time an ambulance went by, he would scream out obscenities and say that he had a gun and that we were making too much noise. And so everybody's like, can you believe that guy? Can you believe that? I said, listen, everybody just relax. When you go through, there's no reason to make any noise. None. When you go through, if you can shut off your backup alarm, shut it off. You don't need to have your lights on. You know where you're going. We know you're here. You know, you're not trying to move anybody out of the way. And so I think everybody just kind of expected that they should stop. You know, I don't know why he didn't leave. Do I think he had a gun? I wasn't willing to find out, but if he just wanted us to stop making as much noise as possible, I was willing to say, okay, we can do that for you. Let's just, but everywhere you went, every business was boarded up, and not just because of the hurricane, but there was no damage really to this building except for every window that it had. It said, trust me, save your energy, somebody has already been here. And then on the other side over here, it had a sad face and it said all of our Happy Meals were taken. It was, you know, it was kind of pathetic to see, but the looting was, and you would see people break windows and go into the store and come back out. The other issue we had is this was common to see on all the city blocks. Not only the debris from the actual hurricane itself, but when people were going in to clean out their homes to try to get back into them, there was nowhere to put the garbage, so they just put it in the street. And so a lot of places there was one way in and one way out, and that was it. And this is where you saw everything. Now picture this, at least we can see it, right? Well, now when it's covered under 6 inches of snow, it was even harder to tell what it was, or you know how much it was and how far out it came. Again, this is just another angle from when we came up. You can see all the mud down and through here, and here's the wire that's part of the wire that was draping across. And then, you know, we set up a staging area and evacuated from them. One of the teams that was with in our task force, they made this up. We thought it was kind of a evacuation. Identifying high-risk locations prior to the disaster. Within your community, within your response area, within your townships or city, do you know what is your biggest threat, or what's going to be your biggest, area that you're going to have to evacuate? Deployment of imminent disasters. Do you have an evacuation plan? Focus on early evacuation. We were talking earlier tonight. Hurricanes in and of itself wouldn't be that bad, mind you, without the natural disaster. But folks don't choose to leave. That's what causes us our problem. If they adhered to the warning and they left, then there wouldn't be anything for us to do from an EMS standpoint, really, except to try to get them out before it happens, and usually locally they handle that. But even here, if we had to evacuate a number of the areas, could we do that by ourselves? I don't think we could, depending on the time frame. And so do you have a plan in place on how you're going to do that? Afford time for safe and manageable evacuation. When we went into the nursing home, the Rockaway, and we arrived, and the strike team was there, and we walk up, we're like, what's going on? They're sweating. Some of them are in t-shirts, and it's 28 degrees outside. They had been trying to shovel. This was a 7-story nursing home. And the first story and a half was like you had to walk down, I think there wound up being almost 8 or 10 steps to walk down. It was filled with sand from the ocean. There's no way to get in. We couldn't physically get into the building until we dug all the sand out. And so that's what they had done. They had dug the sand out, somebody got in through there, and then started doing an assessment within the building, and realized in this building, it had no heat, no electricity, no food, were 123 patients that had been left. There's 2 staff members that stayed. One was, I believe, the director of nursing, and the other one was housekeeping, and neither of them spoke very good English. And so trying to communicate with them was almost impossible. So obviously, the focus on early evacuation and afford the safe and time, do it manageably is important. Helps eliminate unforeseeable events, fire, structure, stability, and collapse. When we went to the nursing home the next day, what we didn't realize, because we were in our mode, we go in and we take care of it, is that the ocean side of the building, the whole bottom all that sand came in because the bottom portion of that building had been washed away. There was no bottom on the ocean side of that building. And so structurally, to look at it, we were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we had people in there. On a normal day, we would never even think of it, regardless of what you had inside, because it simply wasn't safe. Just another shot. This was the building the next day. This is the side. This was the opposite side, away from the ocean side. They had a taller portion over here. So we go in and we say, okay, we have 7 floors. We have to systematically try to do this because you don't want to leave anybody. We know we have 25 trucks here. We know that we can each fit 2 patients if we have to, but we have 123 patients. So we had no way of communicating back. We're trying to text, texts aren't going through. So the very last strike team, we said, you guys go as a strike team, go back to Floyd Bennett, tell them that we're going to need another task force. But tell them we don't need them right now because there's nowhere for them to stage. But we'll come back and we'll try to communicate and let them know when they need to start. We'll let you know how many patients we have total. So some of us had the headlamps, and that was the only way of seeing. And you really needed the headlamp because when we started carrying down patients, you needed to have two hands. But these poor folks, we started at the very top, at the farthest end. We went in, we did a patient count. We come back down, and we say, okay, we have this many patients on this floor, and then we start from the furthest point, and we start to evacuate. These poor people, when you walk into a room that's pitch dark, some of them had 4 into a room, beds to bed, and they were cold and wet and hungry. And here you are, all they see is a light, kind of whipping back and forth. Some of them didn't have the ability to communicate or to talk to you or to tell you what hurt or what was going on. And they were just scared to death. And you could feel them trembling, and you didn't know if it was because they were cold or just because they were scared to death. And so we clear a room, we tie a piece of clean around the door, and so that let us know that we had evacuated that room. And then before the last strike team left, they again went, or task force, they went room to room just to make sure that we got them all. So the problem is as we're taking patients, we have no idea of any basic patient information because we don't know what their history is. I had one lady talk to me the whole time, but I think she thought I was her sister. We had one gentleman in the back of our truck that was deaf and blind and had a trach. We had patients that we were trying to figure out a name, and so you look on their clothing, thinking that the clothing is going to be stamped. Their socks said Joan, but their shirt said Stan. So I mean, you can't defend it and go with that. No past medical history, no admission diagnosis, no medications, allergies, and special needs unless it was obvious of what they needed. I had no clue. So in our ambulance, we would back up the ambulance, and here too, just remember this is all concrete and it's just covered in sand. This was packed down from us driving back and forth, so it was more of like a wet beach, a nice hard wet beach. But we'd say, okay, we'd have the staging area, and we'd say, who doesn't need the stretcher? And so we pull them, and we put them up on the bench, and put them in the captain's chair first. Our ambulance we had 4 patients in ours. We had one that needed the stretcher, one in the captain's chair, and then 2 on the bench seat. And so you'd load them up, and then that's kind of how, the unfortunate part is anybody that needed a stretcher, those were limited because we didn't have the capability. We tried to put those on the bench, but if you've ever sat on a bench or laid on a bench, it's not the most comfortable ride, and we weren't 100% sure where we were going yet. So then we put them in the back of our truck, and what do we have in the back of our truck? All of our supplies. We're rearranging, we put stuff up in the passenger seat and everything, but we have water and we have food. And here are these people for the last 24 hours that have not had any water or had any food. And so obviously for us it was a no-brainer if they could drink the water, that we would give them the water. But this one lady really wanted a muffin. And as quick as I went to go give her a muffin, I'm like, I have no idea about allergies. I mean, what if she starts having an anaphylactic reaction? What if she has, at that point, that's just one of those choices that you say, I'm willing to take the chance. I can't let these people not have any food, but we had no information. And so one of the things that I've come back and shared with some of the nursing facilities that I visited is you really need to keep something at the patient's bedside. And a lot of them now are going to a kit that they hang on the patient's bedside at all times, and it's a waterproof bag, and has their medication list, next of kin, complete history, meds, all of the information that we so desperately wanted. They're starting to formulate now in the event that we had to go and do that quickly. Develop and implement when a risk of a disaster is identified, allow for ease of transport, and provides for speed, efficiency, and safe transport of the patients. One of the issues is when we got to the place that they told us to go, that's the place came out and said, whoa, 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 we have absolutely no beds. We want to help you, but there's nothing we could do. And so what she did is called the fire department over, and we had a battalion chief from the fire department come over and say, okay, let me see if we can't get a school open. He was able to get a hold of the National Guard. They opened up the school and said, this is where you're going to go. They're going to need about an hour to set up the cots and get the docs in and staff. So we all started headed that way, and so now here we're still staging. We arrived at Rockaway at about 11 o'clock at night. The last patient got out of our ambulance at 7:30 in the morning. And so these poor folks, the unfortunate thing, and then as we started bringing them into the school that they made into like a MASH type setting, they're limited. And so when we got the patients in and we're able to undress them a little bit more and look, some of them weren't in a condition where they could stay there. And so then we had to find out where to take them from there. They needed to go to a facility, but not all facilities could, a lot of them were closed, they just simply had no beds. And so trying to find out where to go. And then this is just a quick picture of one of the other obstacles that we had. You couldn't get plow trucks through because a lot of those services just weren't available. Or they were out getting the bridges done and everything else that everybody was traveling, and the little side streets and stuff just were left. This really hampered everybody's efforts a little bit. Some organizational concerns that we ran into, just the commitment. I'm not sure, and had I not experienced this myself, I don't know that you take into consideration the full commitment that it takes for fire EMS and law enforcement to deal with a situation like this. I mean, we went in as onlookers, really. We went in as people that say, okay, tell me what to do and I'll do it. We weren't the people that saying, okay, you have to do this. I think that we could do that, but the task, I mean, when I think about that fire, the battalion chief coming out and taking control of the situation and saying, okay, we know that we've got, just with our ambulances there, we had 53 patients. So they said, let's just, relax, work with me. We had a situation where we had a patient started deteriorating, they needed to go, and sometimes people like to complicate the process, and they were quick to make the decision and just kind of go with it. But that's a tough situation for them to be in, especially when they have a bunch of people saying, we need this, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? Assure proper training and qualified responders. I told everybody in my strike team, you only come and talk to me. They have enough. If you need something, I will get it for you. If you need somebody called, I will call them. We can't have, that's the reason you have a strike team, that's the reason you have a task force. Because when I need something, I'm going to go to the task force leader. And when they need something, then they're going to go to the incident commander. And so the chain of command was critical. Training, again, scenario-based didactic training, research and practical skills training. I used to really think, really, a tabletop, that's going to be fun, we should set up little soldiers too. But they're invaluable. If nothing else, if I go somewhere and I see Lori and I say, Lori, what do you need? We've made that connection, that relationship, and it makes it so much easier. If I go to Fort Gratiot, Pat, what can I do for you? What do you need? Or if he sees me, vice versa. You network and you make those efforts, and hopefully you've all had the same training, so it's easier to stay on the same page. Deployment of action plans assures rapid and organized response. I think the first time we went well. The second time we went better, and even though the conditions that we faced this time went even better. And if we have to go again, I think we'll be that much better. This was our sleeping arrangements, literally, for the 15 days, our shelter. Every day we got up and we completely disinfected the entire ambulance. We, everything got bleached down. I'm a bleach person. Some people just did disinfectant, but I give the old college try is getting bleached. You have to put a patient back there at some point, but you can see, we got a pillow stashed here. We dried our towels right here if we found a shower. He just woke up, so I went ahead and took pictures of his stuff, and our bags are back here in the captain's chair. I let him use my fan because I can't sleep without a fan. And then over here is the bench seat. Some of us just decided to sleep up front because, again, it was just we had limited space. And remember, every time you move something from someplace, you got to put it back where it came, so it's constant back and forth. The unfortunate thing for us is most of our, I don't know if you could tell, it's still pretty light out. Most of the time when we had sleep, it was during the day because we were always deployed at night, it seemed. And so it made it a little bit difficult to sleep during the day, especially with everybody coming and going. Facility commitment, I think, and I don't just say that because I work for Tri-Hospital EMS, Tri-Hospital EMS is committed not only to the deployment but to their employees when they go. There was never a time that our employees were without anything, and it goes through, again, being prepared and understanding what is needed for each and every one of them. When I look back and I see some of those employees that were sent with no equipment, literally had 2 uniforms, and that was it, expecting to be taken care of, or expecting when they got there that they'd have this big facility with showers and beds and food, and they were left with nothing. And I think even, obviously I'm going to be a little bit more passionate about it, but I think even our line level employee were like, you know what, we got it pretty good when you go back and look, but it goes back to training and planning. Develop of action plans, pre-disaster policies and procedures, guidelines, didactic scenario-based training, practical applications, again, training, training, training. This for me probably was one of the most rewarding things, when I said that when you go, you're expecting to run 911 calls and be the hero. To me and to our crews, And I think if still to this day, if you talk to one of our personnel, this was the most overwhelming thing for her. We were staged this was Rockaway Fire Department where we were staged. And when we got there, this was not all nice and neat like this. People had been just coming and dropping stuff off, and they just had this pile outside. And we knew that the snow was coming, and we thought, well, this is all perishable stuff that they brought, so people that have lost their homes and don't have anything are going to come. And so we kind of went in, and we said, hey folks, we don't want to step on anybody's shoes here, but do you mind if we kind of go out and get this organized for you, so when people come in, that the water's where the water needs to be, food's where it needs, so they can just go to the aisle. They're like, you would do that? I'm thinking, we are here for whatever you need. You shouldn't have to do anything except get some rest and worry about if you have a call. That's what we're here for. And so, without hesitation, before I turned around, our crews were there, being the rock stars that they had been the entire time, and had this all set up. I'm going to say probably within about 2.5 hours. They had moved, I don't know how many hundred cases of water, food, there was more over to this side, and then that way when they cleared out the facility inside, we could just move it in pallet by pallet and just kind of organize it a little bit. These people were so grateful that we were willing to do that. Their humility and their ability to say thank you to us, I was just very overwhelmed with it. I thought, that's what we're here, that we're all here to do that. The conclusion, there's no secret to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, learning from your failure. Again, each time that we went on a deployment and we went on a mission, we learned something, not only from the experience, but from the communities in which we had the honor to work with. And I do say honor. When we were talking about the need for trying to get fuel, the locals would become very aggressive when they saw us at a gas station, because they thought that the gas station was hoarding fuel. Not understanding that we're just there for diesel. They don't have gasoline. We're just getting diesel. And at one point, the police officer kind of came up and he was like, I'll just stick here till you guys, fuel up. And like, wow, you're all the way from Michigan, we're like, yeah. And he said, how things been? And he said, we feel horrible for you folks. I can't believe how much you lost. And I said, I didn't realize how much I took a shower for granted. I would just love to have a shower. And he said, you know what, you need something? I'm going to give you my cell phone. You call me, my wife will cook you dinner, you can take a shower, we'll take care of you, But they were willing to stop whatever they had to do to open up their homes to us. And I thought, here's an entire city that not only probably just recovered from 9/11, but now, has this devastation. And the only thing they can think about is to take care of us. And so, if any of you have any questions, I went kind of quick, but I know it's late. And I could probably talk about this for hours. I'm very passionate about it. I'm honored to be a part of the deployment team when we go. I think I learned something each time that I can bring back, and hopefully, heaven forbid that we have a disaster here that will make us a little bit more valuable.